This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's MTG Top 10, we're taking a look at cards that can animate lands. In other words, we'll be talking about cards that can turn lands into creatures. This is an effect as old as Magic itself, as Alpha Card's Living Lands and Korma spell turned all lands of a particular type into 1/1 creatures. We've seen the effect pretty frequently over the years. It shows up the most frequently in green and red, but it sometimes shows up on cards of other colors too. Sometimes the effect we get only lasts until end of turn, while others are far more permanent. Turning one of your lands into a creature can be pretty nice because it turns a card that usually doesn't have a real impact on the board into a very real presence. The downside is that your opponent can also use creature removal on your land, but the upside is often worth it. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be able to make a creature into a land. I did exclude creature lands from this list, as I've already done an MTG Top 10 on them, and they sort of feel like their own thing anyway, since they turn themselves into creatures, whereas all the cards that are eligible for this list are non-land cards that can turn some land or lands into creatures. In all, there were 181 cards eligible for this list, and in this video we'll look at the 10 of those that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and Set Championships, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, and this includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Online Challenges. Alright, let's get to our list. At number 10, it's Sylvan Awakening. This sorcery turns all of your lands into 2/2 creatures with Reach, Indestructible, and Haste, and the effect lasts all the way until your next turn. In other words, you get to take advantage of your lands being creatures during your turn, and on your opponent's next turn they will still be creatures. If you have a lot of lands, this can potentially let you swing for a ton right away, or it can be sort of a roundabout version of a fog effect, since your Reach Indestructible lands will be able to block just about anything safely. Sylvan Awakening was printed in 2018's Dominaria, but it's only started to see significant play recently, in 2021. This is because, as cool as it seems to turn all your lands into creatures with this card, doing so usually doesn't let the person who cast it take that much of an advantage. Since you have to tap 3 lands in the first place, it isn't like you'll be doing anything that impressive, and for a long time, Sylvan Awakening seemed kind of underwhelming. However, the Pioneer format has been good for Sylvan Awakening, where it's key in making Jeskai Ascendancy combo decks work. With the Ascendancy in play, casting Sylvan Awakening is pretty insane. Once your lands are creatures, they will start untapping every time you cast a non-creature spell, so you end up actually netting mana every time you cast one of those spells. And because you're looting at the same time, you're likely to chain together a whole bunch of cheap cantrips until you've drawn most of your library, at which point you can simply attack with your massive, indestructible lands, since they'll also be getting +1/+1 for every spell. Jeskai Ascendancy is one of the top decks in Pioneer, and that means Sylvan Awakening is very likely to gain more points going forward. At number 9, it is KOTH of the Hammer. It has the same number of points as Sylvan Awakening, but more first tier top 8s, so I gave it the higher spot on the list. This red Planeswalker comes with a +1 that allows him to untap a mountain and turn it into a 4/4 creature until end of turn. This can actually help you ramp, in addition to giving you a pretty sizable creature. In general, KOTH really loves mountains, as his -2 gives you red mana for each of your mountains, and his ultimate makes it so all of your mountains can tap to ping something. KOTH's array of abilities fit nicely into more aggressive and more controlling red decks. More aggressive decks lean more on the +1, while more controlling decks are more interested in the other 2 abilities. KOTH ended up seeing play in multiple formats. In Block, it was played in Red Deck Wins and Mono Red Control. In Standard, it was also played in Red Deck Wins, as well as in Blue Red Delver. His single point in Modern came from Skred Red, a Mono Red mid-range snow deck. His single point in Extended came in a Scapeshift deck that could side him in against opponents who had too many ways to disrupt the combo. He has played a similar role in the sideboard of Legacy Painter's Servant decks. He doesn't have any points since 2017, but it wouldn't be a huge shock if he gained more in the future. At number 8, it is Part the WATERVEIL, a card with Awaken from Battle for Zendikar. Zendikar is a plane where lands coming to life happens all the time. There are mages there that specialize in doing such a thing, so it makes sense that Battle for Zendikar included a mechanic that animates lands. Awaken lets you choose to pay an alternate cost, and if you do, you get to put counters on one of your lands and turn it into a creature, in addition to the regular effect the card has. In this case, Part the WATERVEIL is a time walk for 6 mana, but if you have 9 mana, you make a land into a 6/6 in addition to taking another turn. Taking another turn is always nice, but if you're adding a huge body to the board at the same time you're doing it, it can be particularly spicy. While it isn't quite Alrund's Epiphany, if you've played against that much newer card, you have some idea of how it feels to play against Part the WATERVEIL. It didn't do a ton in Standard. 9 mana was asking a whole lot, though it did pick up 1 point in the format in a Simic ramp deck. In Modern, it's been played in Walks decks. These are decks built entirely around chaining together time walks, and one of the main ways the deck can win is with lands you animate with Part the WATERVEIL, which can attack repeatedly before your opponent ever gets another turn. It's been the most successful though in Pioneer, where it's played in Omnath Ramp, a 5-color ramp deck that uses Omnath Locus of Creation alongside a whole bunch of ramp to get insane advantages, and one of the things the deck can ramp into is an awakened Part the WATERVEIL. Part the WATERVEIL will certainly gain more points in Pioneer, and Modern isn't entirely out of the question either. At number 7, it is Nissa, Steward of Elements. Nissa is a planeswalker that hails from the plane of Zendikar, so it's fitting that one of her recurring themes is that she has the ability to animate lands. This Nissa is interesting because she is X-costed and comes into play with X loyalty, so she's sort of customizable. She makes it on this list as a result of her ultimate, which lets you turn 2 of your lands into 5/5 flyers with haste, something that will most frequently result in 10 damage being done to your opponent. She can also raise her loyalty pretty quickly with her +2 that scries 2, and she has a 0 ability that lets you cheat things into play from the top of your library. She gained all of her points in Standard, primarily in energy decks. She's been idle for a while now, and it is very likely she gets passed by the more active cards behind her, like Part the WATERVEIL and Sylvan Awakening. At number 6, it is PLANAR Outburst, another card with Awaken. On a base level, Outburst is a 5-mana Wrath, something that's often playable in Standard formats already, so it's great that it has Awaken upside. If you pay 8 for it, you get to destroy all non-land creatures, and you get a 4/4, which means you immediately add to the board after you've destroyed everything. And Awakened lands have haste, so if you had the extra mana, you can even attack with it right away. PLANAR Outburst gained all of its points in Standard control decks between 2015 and 2016, so like Nissa, Steward of Elements, it's probably going to get passed on this list in the near future. At number 5, it is Nissa, Vital Force. Like I said, most versions of Nissa come with the ability to animate a land, and Nissa Vital Force is no different. She has a +1 that lets you turn a land into a 5/5 with haste. You can use this land to attack your opponent right away, but she can actually use the land to protect herself too, since it stays a creature until your next turn. She also has a -3 that lets you get a permanent back from your graveyard, and a very accessible ultimate that draws you a card every time you play a land. You can get the ultimate going after only using her +1 once. All of that power has made Nissa into a multi-format all-star. She was played in many different green decks while in Standard, including Golgari Delirium, Golgari Aggro, Copycat, Jund, all the different energy variants, and Golgari Constrictor. In Modern, she's primarily been played in Jund and the Rock, and in Legacy, she's gained points in both Elves and lands. She's going to keep gaining points going forward. At number 4, it's another Nissa, Nissa WORLDWAKER. This Nissa comes with a +1 that makes a land into a 4/4 with Trample, and unlike some versions of the effect, the creature stays that way. Like Nissa Vital Force, she can use the animated land to protect herself or to pressure your opponent. Her other +1 ramps you pretty effectively, and she has an ultimate that lets you search up a bunch of basic lands and animate them all. She does start with 3 loyalty, so it takes a while to get there, but that's okay because her other 2 abilities are so good. Nissa WORLDWAKER was heavily played in Standard, gaining all 57 of her points there. She found her way into a whole lot of decks, including Jund, Devotion to Green, and Abzan midrange. She doesn't have any points since 2015, but she was so successful in her Standard format that she's still in a pretty good spot on this list. At number 3, it is Ruinous Path, another card with Awaken. This has a base level as a pretty nice removal spell. For 3 mana, you get a sorcery that can kill creatures or planeswalkers. That's usually the kind of thing that's good enough to see play in Standard anyway, but Ruinous Path comes with that Awaken upside, and in this case you can pay 7 mana to also get a 4/4 creature. That's quite powerful, as you're subtracting from your opponent's board while adding significantly to your own. Like Nissa WORLDWAKER, Ruinous Path only saw play in Standard, but was so heavily played there that it still ended up with a pretty high score. At number 2, it is Nissa Vastwood Seer. This Nissa is a double-faced Planeswalker card from Magic Origins. On one side, she's a creature, and on the other side, she's a Planeswalker. This whole cycle does a really neat job of representing the moment that a Planeswalker's spark was ignited. Anyway, she starts out as a 3-mana 2/2 that draws you a forest, which isn't bad. She helps make sure that you hit your 4th land, and that's not a bad thing to have around. Once you get that 7th land into play though, Nissa transforms into the powerful Planeswalker Nissa Sage Animist. She sports a +1 that draws you a card, a -2 that can make a 4/4 elemental, and an ultimate that turns lands into 6/6 elementals. That's a pretty nice package to have, especially because you only ever end up paying 3 mana for it. She's another card that was heavily played in the Standard over time, and she was made especially attractive by the presence of Collected Company. Since she was a creature, you could grab with a powerful instant, and getting a Planeswalker out of Company was pretty amazing. Despite all her successes in Standard, she has never really transitioned into other formats. She has been played a little bit in Pioneer, but so far, she doesn't have any points there. And at number 1, probably not surprising anybody, it is Nissa Who Shakes the World. That's right, 4 of the top 5 cards on this list are Nissa Planeswalkers, so I think it's pretty safe to say she is the undisputed queen of animating lands. This Nissa is the newest card on the list, but she has already been such a powerhouse that she was able to comfortably claim the number 1 spot. She makes it on this list as a result of her +1, which puts 3 counters on a land and untaps it, while giving it both vigilance and haste and making it into a creature. Her static ability is also very powerful, as it allows you to double the amount of mana your forests produce. Her ability to multiply mana, combined with her land animation effect, is pretty nasty. Because the lands have vigilance, you can actually attack with them, and then use them to produce 2 green mana, provided you animated a forest. Her ultimate then makes sure you have all the mana ever, at which point it's hard to lose, especially because all your lands that have become creatures also get indestructible. And really, if you just stick Nissa in play at all and untap, it's just really hard to lose. She's been a key card in Standard, Pioneer, and Historic ramp decks, where she can power out huge Hydroid Crassuses and Flying Shark tokens. These days, she's also played in Pioneer Devotion to Green decks, and that seems to be a format where she'll continue to gain more points. Right now, it looks pretty unlikely any card will ever overtake her as the number 1 card that animates lands. So, those are the 10 cards that animate lands that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these cards, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more Magic content. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, and there are over 450 of them, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.